than science. And if we think that that level is what's necessary, then consecutive tests can provide that. And I do think we do have the tools to be able to restore travel. It's a question of the social will, the social capital, and an organization that can utilize and operationalize those tests to make the consumer, when they enter a plane, know that they're as safe as they really will be.
Thank you so much, Rick, for your valuable input. I think this is mostly key questions, how to test appropriately, but also I think how to document it and transfer these data, which is also a main issue, for example, in Europe. How do we handle the data? How do we handle the data security? How do we find proper protocols, for example, between the US, Europe, and Africa, so that these data can be communicated and all the governments feel comfortable with this, and building up trust that people who get moved from A to B, not only are tested, results can be tracked later. Yeah.
Thomas, can I add one thing about that? There is precedent for this. I know I've traveled to Africa quite a bit for work, and other countries. You have to have documentation of certain vaccinations before you enter. And if you don't, you could get tested to prove that you have those things before you're allowed to enter. So even though we have individual privacy guidelines, there's still a precedent of showing some biological status of protection when we go between borders.
Right. So I'm eager now to hear the European view. Welcome, Mr. Enders, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that is definitely a big topic. And I'm afraid I won't be able to give you that much on the European perspective. I'm one of many colleagues dealing with this issue in the German Foreign Office. I'm more from the transportation side, and I will give you some views on basically what you had asked me to talk about. So you gave me 4 questions, and I will basically stick to those. We are dealing here with an issue that has a connectivity aspect, travel restrictions aspect, and quarantine regulations aspect, and I think the latter is what most interests you. I will go to your first question, which is about the trust of consumers and how it can be regained. And that is a very difficult moment to answer such a question, as we are on a downward slope currently, and especially in Germany, we are facing a situation where various parts of the country are now declared risk zones, and we can hardly travel from Berlin to other parts of the country because we will not be allowed to enter a hotel without a corona test, which is where basically, where this issue comes in, the corona test. It is, of course, not that easy to get a corona test if you decide to travel within a day or two. And so things are getting ever more complicated, and it is very hard to work on a medium or long-term perspective. The decision whether you travel, of course, not only depends on various other issues, as you all know, but trust definitely helps. We're entering winter, well, that is the season is, of course, one reason why travel is being reduced. You know that in aviation, travel levels have been down by as much as 98% as compared to the previous period last year. It is not that bad within Germany and Europe, but intercontinentally, it is down to as low as 5% or so. One piece of good news I heard on the radio today was that some experts claimed it was not necessary to disinfect surfaces anymore. So that infection was only transmitted, or you could only be infected by airborne transmission. I'm sure you all know much more about that than I do, but this reduces the perception of risk, and I'm sure this will have a positive impact. Which organizational and administrative measures need to be implemented to make traveling possible again? There are a lot of strategies and concepts that we are dealing with from the G7 or the G20 or from various business associations that are putting a lot of pressure on us. And in practice, one must say that every situation is different. We are working on bilateral relations with many countries, arranging green lane arrangements, travel bubbles, and then negotiating those. And there is no system to be seen there, but still the strategies keep coming in from various countries, or as I said, G7, G20. And it is actually quite a mess in our daily work. Can the sector be resuscitated before a vaccine is available? That is, of course, very difficult, but actually quite easy to answer, only up to a certain point. And, but you know that much better than I do. We are working on it every day at a very low level. And the question is, what are you aiming for? Are you aiming to have a 50% level of pre-COVID travel, or 60 or 80%? One thing is sure, we won't be back to 100% when it comes to air travel. When will business travel be possible again? Well, it is possible. Connectivity is extremely limited. The number of flights is very, very low. And eligibility, of course, is limited. Who is allowed to travel? You have certain categories of people that are allowed to travel. Things are being made more complicated by the fact that we are an EU member. So there are some rules we have agreed on, which are specific categories of persons, of people that are allowed to travel under the current conditions. And sometimes that is helpful, sometimes it is not. But just thinking about the maritime sector and the crews that are on ships and that are not able to deboard and return home, that is a very, very big question. Another thing the European Union is coordinating is how to deal with specific countries. There are different categories of countries depending on the level of infection in those countries, and it makes it difficult sometimes for us when a country is on the positive list and you then have air travel, air transportation from that country to various EU countries, but the EU countries are dealing with it on the same minimum level, but some are saying, okay, we will allow people from that country to enter our country, and others will say, well, only on the basis of reciprocity. So if we're not allowed to travel there, we will not allow others to come straight to Germany, which leads to situations where people will travel to Amsterdam and then take the train to Germany, which is then very harmful for our own airline. What will the resumption of business travel depend on? That is, there are, of course, many other aspects, like what to expect on return. The quarantine issue is a very important one. And what might happen between the decision to travel and the actual date of travel? Will there be further restrictions? What is the insurance situation like? Are my tickets refundable? And that kind of issue. But I don't think that is what you are actually aiming at discussing today. And I will stop right there. And once again, apologies for being a bit German-centered and not that much an EU expert. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Engels. And we already have first questions here from the audience, but I would suggest that at this moment we will make a first round with our distinguished speakers, and then later on in the Q&A session we will come to a proactive discussion between the speakers and the audience. Yeah. As next speaker, I would like to introduce Mr. Adam, who is working very closely with Africa CDC. And Mr. Enders and Rick, what I found fascinating, because we just had 2 days ago another task force video conference and meeting with African Exim Bank, the United Nations and African Union, is a tremendous effort within Africa to develop a joint screening standard so that intercontinental travel is possible again. And Dr. Adam is one of the key persons in this task force handling the standardization and harmonization process, that all these African countries agree on a screening standard, but also on the transmission of the data. Yeah? And it would be then, after his short presentation, interesting to see, in how far this Pan-African initiative can be connected to the US and to Europe, and see how a screening process and security process can be harmonized and requirements from Europe. Welcome, Dr. Adam. I will now share the screen with Dr. Adam's presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. I'm going to be extremely very brief and just dive quickly through. And thanks for all the amazing remarks that have already been made, and also the amazing colleagues you have. What Africa is determined to do, and I'm talking about a continent that has had various challenges, public health challenges in the past. We all remember Ebola. We also remember when SARS-1 and SARS-2 happened. And also we have a lot of other diseases like the existing public health diseases, which require that traveling across the continent or different parts of the world, Africans carry yellow cards or vaccination cards, among others. Most of these things are easy to fake, tamper with, and we have instances where people traveling from one part of the continent to another have been returned because the immigration officers didn't trust the vaccination certificates they had. And so we, working with Afro Champions, is a private sector stakeholder, multi-stakeholder organization with the Pan-African institutions who are members, which include the likes of Africa Exim Bank, Africa Academy of Sciences, Trade Development Bank, amongst others. We brought together innovators together and tried to understand, how do we use this opportunity? How do we transfer COVID from a crisis to an opportunity? And use this opportunity to now develop a system by which an organization like the Africa CDC can use to create a new public health order for the continent, where lab results can be integrated across the continent, we have situations where you have a major laboratory chain like SynLab from Europe in Africa, and tests done in one country, just you cross the border to another country, and you're required to do another test from another SynLab or another Lancet in the next country, which really doesn't make sense. Africa has 55 countries, pretty fragmented, but Europe, America, and other parts of the world have agreements that enable people to move around freely. So we think that in the spirit of the Continental Free Trade Area, and if you may go to the next slide, the trusted travel mechanism is very important for harmonizing restrictions among countries. Mr. Liu, if you can just move to the next slide, yes. So it's, like I said, it's an alliance of AU, CDC, and Pan-African institutions. The next slide, please, talks about the previous one. It shows, exactly, this slide shows the micro apps that we built for the CDC that shows the travel requirements. So when you go to the URL, Africa CDC Trusted Travels,
it takes you to this particular portal, and the portal then takes you to those micro apps that Mr. Lu shared earlier, one for the harmonization of restrictions. So what we have is focal people within countries posting restrictions around countries, because you have certain countries requiring 48 hours validity test, others requiring 72. You have others that are requiring PCR tests, others are requiring antigen tests. Pretty confusing for travelers. People traveling from China, coming to other parts of Africa that require 48-hour validity tests, and by the time they transit through others, the validity period is over, and they require new tests again. I have a colleague who traveled from Guinea-Bissau to Dubai, and he had to test 6 times, just traveling from Bissau, Dakar, Abidjan, then to Istanbul, and then on the way back. So these are some of the things that we feel for a continent that is suffering a lot from tourism, and a continent that is suffering a lot from also looking for foreign direct investment. We should not close our doors to the world. We should make travel safe and trusted. And so harmonizing the labs, if you may go to the next slide, for us is extremely important, where the Africa Center of Disease and Control becomes a repository for where all the labs that are doing tests. So these are the macro apps again. So the first one talks about the travel requirements, so that individuals are able to know which restrictions apply to which country, what are the entry and exit requirements. And this is also integrated to airlines. So we have quite a number of airlines who have integrated already to the CDC API. And now we are plugging into the labs. And so right there, you're able to know which labs, which country you're going to are trusted and designated, which airlines are already plugged in. And then when it comes to the digital test results, when you do your test, you are able to now get a seal appendage onto that test. And with that code or that alphanumeric number, you're able to go to the airport or to the land border, and there's a method by which they can verify to know whether the test was valid and enable you to cross over. If you may move on to the last slide, I believe the next slide. This for us provides, so this is the short code that you're able, the QR code that the lab is able to generate for you, that you're able to now use to travel and enter into hotels and then enter into airports or wherever where might require, as long as those touch points are integrated in the system. And the touch points are airlines, the touch points are labs, and the touch points are the focal points in the public health authorities, or what we call the port of health authorities at airports and land borders. Next slide, please. I think the next and final slide. The next slide, please. Next slide. So here again, no, the one before, please. Here again, the slide before, yes. So here again, we're looking at hotels, tourism, and we're integrating quite a number of hotels on the continent. We're looking forward to also, we are working with the WTTC, World Travel and Tourism Center, which is a member of the consortium, as well as also the Africa Tourism Board. And what we are saying is that there should be a way in which people get to hotels, are able to get on the app and be able to report if guidelines are being kept, where there are places where huge gatherings are meeting, where there's conferences, because people travel to go to conferences, to go to meetings, to go to exhibition centers, to go to to resorts, and places where huge people are gathering and huge numbers are gathering are also a mechanism through which contagion can be transmitted and diseases can be spread. So if we have a sense of who are coming in, how many people, whether the right social distance protocols, whatever the protocols are, we programatize them into the software, and people interacting with the software are able to report if things are being done in the right. And this will become a form of a trip advisor where people can be able to rank and rate resorts and hotels that are keeping standards. What we're clear about is that whether we like it or not, bioscreening, biosafety are going to become part of how we travel and where we travel to. So making sure that there are digital vigilant tools put in place to create safe bubbles around how we travel is extremely important and very central to this Panabio solution that we've offered as a public good to the African Union, which we're currently rolling out on the continent. And hopefully, with the likes of you, we can now partner to take it global. Thank you. And the last panel just shows some of the partners that have been working with us to give us the solutions and the ideas that we programatize into the software, and the list continues to go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adam. This was a fantastic presentation and gives us a good view, you know, how Africa is dealing with it, particularly with the experience Africa has with diseases, and to standardize, you know, the screening process. Dr. Vera Sommer could join us today. She is Secretary General of the United Nations Commission for Africa. And welcome, Vera, and so happy to join us today. I know you're...
Zeker.
Ik denk aan die einde van die bespreking.
Yes.
Je weet, dus
a few words from you. Quick update on what we have discussed now in the past 30 minutes. Vera, are you there? Can you hear us? Oh, I think she dropped, unfortunately, out again. Okay, so we will continue now, and when Vera is in again, I would like to give her the word, because also from the United Nations point of view, it's one of the key issues, you know, to open up the continent and open up international travel again. So, I also want to introduce now and Pierre Bob. Pierre, you know, is a real veteran of the hotel and tourism industry, and I think, as Dr. Adam says, this could be a great opportunity, you know, to open up this industry. And yeah, maybe you can give us your view how the industry can be opened up again, and what is the hotel and tourism industry really expecting, you know, from the leaders worldwide.
Thank you very much, Thomas, to give me this opportunity to be part of this conference. Hoteliers, you know, are at the end of the chain, and what we like to see very much is a very strong cooperation between government and private sector. You know, one of our great concerns is closing of the borders, make travel more free, and we discuss about testing. All this is very, very important. But I am very pleased to see that last week, I understand there's been a very important meeting, G20, with the Ministry of Tourism, who invited about nearly 50 key players of the tourism industry, and also the World Travel Tourism Association, to come up with really ideas and plan how we can all work together. I think, you know, hoteliers need the support of the government. We are today facing a very, very difficult cash flow situation. Hotels are closing down. Good staff have to be laid off. And of course, you know, this cannot be continued. Therefore, I think the first things I will recommend is really to develop the cooperation between government and private sectors. Also, maybe to review the quarantine aspect. Now, if somebody is tested negative, try to impose this long quarantine on arrival. This could be maybe a point which should be discussed at the highest level. But you know, everything is a matter of perception. And I must say, going to Africa, because let's focus on Africa, I think if people want to decide to go to a country in Africa, I think there's two important factors. One is the issue of safety and security, and the other one is the perception, how the government is managing the pandemic. So you can see the role of the government is extremely important in the perception of how international travel will go to Africa. Now, I can see this pandemic having a very important role of different results in tourism in Africa, and could even be, I would say, a revolution. Because this we will have to develop within Africa national and regional travel. This is extremely important. And this too often is overlooked by Africans who prefer to travel to Europe or to Asia. But, Africa has so much to offer. And I would say this is something that each Ministry of Tourism in Africa should think about it, is how to boost these inter-regional travels and to make tourism surviving in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pierre, for your valuable input. And I want to play back, before we start with our Q&A session, one more time to Rick and Tillman about the remarks from Pierre and Dr. Edem when it comes to standardizing information and showing if testing is basically qualified, standardized, and trusted by appropriate digitalization, if this is the way to go to open up the travel on an intercontinental scale again. Mr. Enders, I remember your words from the beginning. From a German perspective, we look rather into, is it a risk country or is it not a risk country? But in how far could be there a move from a European view, not looking at the risk factor, but looking at, the screening process and being able, to screen the people in a way that it can be trusted by the receiving or sending countries in order to open up the travel again?
Well, thank you. And as I said, it depends on so many different issues, the connectivity, the health issue, the immigration issue. And if you decide on traveling to a country based on the perception or on the regulations that this country has implemented, then you must also look at what does it mean on your return. So if these things line up and the situation in the country is such that on return there will be no quarantine because the conviction is there that everything is under control, then that's a great thing. It will also depend on the question, what are the immigration requirements of that country and what are the health requirements to foreigners coming into the country. So it is such a complex issue that it is very difficult to give a general answer. And every case, as I said, is different. And we are completely paralyzed by all these different situations that all have to be dealt with. But we have moved on 1st of October from a system where we restricted or we recommended not to travel to a differentiated system. And some airlines have now taken up intercontinental flights again based on this assessment or these recommendations given by the government. And one example is Cuba. Travel to Cuba is possible again because the assessment is it can be done, and there is a flight going there, so the connectivity issue is dealt with. That's just one example, and I think things will get even more complicated because before they get easier.
Of course, that's always the view. What is the U.S. perspective on that? Right.
as I said earlier, it's very difficult to summarize a U.S. perspective, but I think that the current thinking is that it's going to be very tricky about the leaving and returning. And that I think it's going to be difficult if we have separate criteria based on the prevalence in a given country when people are worried about who you'll mix with in another place and whether the country of return had a higher prevalence. So I think there's going to have to be some kind of standardization about comings and goings, about testing when you come and enter. And I think the United States is more likely to insist on some sort of standard that would be met by a test rather than just saying that a country had a low amount of COVID and so it's okay to come back from that country. I think we'll see less of these sort of districting of specific countries and more uniform testing to go between places.
I see here, and Dr. Inam just raised his hand. Dr. Inam, your
yes,
comment.
So what I wanted to interject is that the colleague who just spoke was so right about the need to standardize, but that standardization cannot happen without the accumulation of data that can be analyzed to see how the quality assurance needed to be embedded or put in place happens. So what we've built into our tool is a quality assurance mechanism. So for example, and bear in mind that most of the big lab chains, laboratory chains working on the continent, are European labs that are ISO standards, labs like Lancet, labs like AMPAC, labs like SynLab, labs that have high standards. So the sense is that if I'm leaving a country in one part of the continent, airlines require that you have a test result before you even get on the plane. But then countries also have their requirements. So if I do a test and I get on a plane and then I show up at another destination and then I'm made to do another test, we built into the system a mechanism where those tests for the first 2 months or even for the first one can be tested for the various routes. So if you're coming from Ghana to the US or you're coming from the US or wherever to Nigeria, we know that this particular airplane is bringing people who are testing from these labs. And the machine learning tools and AI tools have been built in to over time begin to study if whatever test was done before is consistent with. So if you get a negative test before you travel and you get a negative test when you arrive, after a month, we're able to make the case, the CDC can make a case that for this particular route, there's a need to relax the restrictions because we trust that data and we think that it doesn't make sense to continue to impose those restrictions on people traveling that route. However, if we are finding out that in another route, there are test results that are showing negative, and yet when they get tested on arrival, they are shown as positive, then we may increase the restriction or may investigate that lab to find out why we're having that anomaly, and eventually decide to either take off that lab from the trusted registry that we have come up with. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Ian. May I comment also for 1 minute from our DGNI perspective? As all of you know, we have developed one of the most accurate antigen tests at the moment worldwide, and we are the first antigen test which is working with so swaps are not necessary anymore, and actually tests have shown that we are actually working even better with saliva than with swabs, which is of course much more comfortable for the passenger. And as you rightfully said, we have a colleague here in the audience who just traveled from Ghana to Dubai and to Greece and back, and he was tested like 6 times. And he told me he didn't feel his brain anymore because of all the swabs in his nose. Yeah. At the end of the day, I think there are products now available. Fortunately, now at the moment, our test got tested by the state laboratory in Bavaria, and it was a joint test between Bavaria, Hessen, and North Rhine-Westphalia, but also Lufthansa and German Railways participated in this test. So they jointly tested several antigen tests, and we are happy to announce that our test was one of the very best tests in this test. together with one of our dear colleagues here from Europe. And now we are discussing first pilots, with this antigen test. And question again to Mr. Enders and to Rick and also to Dr. Eden. I think it is not only a question, to standardize it, but also to have the right test facilities, which makes it also practical possible. This, for example, our test, you have the results in 15 minutes, you don't need additional equipment, and we are now at an accuracy of 99.2% or a sensitivity of over 97%. So this is way above what Dr. Ellison said, 80% what was the standard a few weeks ago. So we improved the testing, we have testing mechanisms, we went now through the testing operations here with the German government, and now we are opening up for first pilots. And also a question to Dr. Enders, could you see that we possibly could organize first pilots, as Dr. Eden said, that we look at specific routes where we can do, let's say, pilot routes where we do it through testing, and then after 2 weeks, 4 weeks, we see through intensive screening whether this was successful or not successful, so that these routes can be opened again for regular flights. So I start with Dr. Eden and Dr. Tillman, Mr. Tillman.
Oh, I think my micro is still on. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we started very early discussing these issues because the first thing that happened after the lockdown was that international air freight was down, and it was the biggest issue was that pilots were requested to go into quarantine at destination. So the main destination at the time by far, and about 80% of all freight flights went to that one destination, it was Shanghai. We had to make sure that the Chinese would allow the pilots to actually return after 24 hours. Otherwise, the planes would have been stranded for 24 hours. So we managed to do that by working on eligibility, so meaning that specific categories of people were able to travel despite the global lockdown. And then the second step was actually to make sure that these pilots could be tested before departure. And we managed to find some providers that were able to give a result within 4 or 5 hours. Because the restrictions from the Chinese side, and I think it's okay to mention the country here, were getting ever more difficult to handle, to tackle. So we needed these tests in order to enable pilots to fly and come back. And it was beginning to be very difficult for the airlines to find pilots that were willing to go, because it was not sure whether they would be able to return. The next question, of course, being what happens if they're tested positive on arrival. So we have been working on this from the start, basically. But for us in the EU, we always said within a week or two that pilots were generally exempt from travel restrictions. But I'm not really sure what that meant for testing on return. But pilots were never the big issue. The big question is more what you do to get away from these specific categories of people that are allowed to travel and go back to the general public. And that's where it gets really difficult, as you know. I hope I answered your question in part, at least.
Yeah. So we have one question here from the audience. He raised his hand already some time ago, and I want to give him the opportunity now to ask this question. Mr. Force, why don't you raise your question now? You have to turn on.
Now you should hear me, yeah? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just want to make a remark that which is, I think, totally forgotten in this crisis. Yeah, if you look at the situation now, yeah, how does confidence come back? Confidence comes back if everybody trusts each other that he is not infected. Very simple. Our electronic way here is absolutely safe. If we meet naturally, it's not that safe. So how can we establish? How can we establish that? The key question is testing, yes. But the second, what is forgotten, what I want now to, is the communication around it. And this is worldwide a catastrophe. I think we are still in the year of 1950 or something like that, yeah? Or even World War. Yeah, it is, by the way, our African friend here, yeah, Eden, what I see here, yeah, who is the only one from the backwards Africa, who raises that question, yeah. What you need in addition to those tests, yeah, is a verification, an internet-based verification method, yeah, where you just get a key and you log in, you see that Mr. Pierre Bock, whom I just see, or Mr. Thomas Huhr, Mr. Max Strauss, has done this and that test at that and that time, and how this test is internationally recognized. And you do not test 6 times, then you test once, yeah, and if you have, and the question of such a database is always the same question, yeah, you need first a reliable source, and second, a reliable transport way, yeah? The reliable transport way can be done by modern internet means, yeah? Second is a reliable source. So a great international institution like the US government, like European Union, or even Germany would endorse that, yeah? And then you just stand in Mr. Bob's hotel, yeah? This guy has a scanner, yeah, and he sees exactly, okay, Mr. Wu is just coming in, yeah, was tested, whatever, the day before, yeah, with that and that result and that test, yeah. By that way, what also could be controlled is the reliability of the tests and the effects of the test, yeah. Because if you know the history of that, yeah, and this person has been whatever how many times tested, and he becomes sick or not sick or so on, you have a history of that, and you build up an enormous database. Yeah? COVID would be a chance to establish something like this worldwide and to come to new levels of let's say of a health policy. Yeah? But the data side of the COVID problem is completely overseen so far by any government. This is true the same way for the US as for the European Union or the German government or my Bavarian government here. I'm from south of Munich. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your input, and in particular, thank you for your input again, Mr. Enders, Adam, and of course, Mr. Bob. And I want to open now really the stage also to our audience. And I'm really excited that so many could join us this afternoon. We have about 2 more minutes left for our joint video conference here. So whoever would like to place a question should raise his hand and start. I think we start now. Oh, and I see, finally, I'm so happy to see that Minister Segoko from Botswana, the Minister of Transportation, was able now to join us. Minister, so happy to see you here. And please join our panel and give us the perspective from Botswana and Southern Africa.
Thank you, Thomas. May I proceed?
Sure. Yes.
Thank you very much. And first, let me apologize for not joining the meeting much earlier. I unfortunately have been caught up at the point where I thought I might be there, but but it turned out that I wasn't able to do so. So my apologies to all for my delay in joining the meeting. I have actually listened to, I think, 2 or 3 speakers, and they've raised certain points which I'd like to comment on. But to speak basically from the perspective of Botswana, our experiences, and what we are hoping for more in the immediate future, is that we have a national airline that was grounded since basically March. All other air operators that were coming into the country also came to stop their flights essentially at the end of March. So the air services that we've been experiencing and having have been really around the transportation of cargo and goods. And that is more or less the same situation that we experienced in respect of the movement of traffic and vehicle between our borders with our neighbors, that is on roads. So it has been a very devastating impact that the COVID has had on our travel and movement, and consequently our economy, though we try to facilitate and make the movement of goods possible. And therefore it's in our view that it's imperative that the steps that are necessary to open travel, both business and leisure, because one of the sectors really affected the tourism sector. And we've engaged, Botswana has what's called a presidential task force, headed by His Excellency, which really takes the multi-stakeholder forums that we engage in terms of the protocols and all the statutory requirements that we need to control the disease. So that task force is supported by what's called a task team with medical expertise in the task team. And they are the advisors to the task force. So stakeholder ministries such as ourselves, the Ministry of Transport and Communication, we've made submissions to them in relation to the protocol or standard operating procedures that we think would be necessary in terms of us being able to return aviation and flight into our country, and also the operation of our own national airline operation. And what I really want to do is, without too details about all of it, the principal requirements, and one of the real necessary requirements is actually rapid testing. It's also that between states that we have agreements in terms of the verification of test results. And that's what I should have said, is that our view is that it is important possibly to test, not on arrival but on departure. And that we agree in terms of a validity period for the test results that have been obtained from what we believe must be accredited testing laboratories with the World Health Organization. I believe there's convergence that's coming to around the 72-hour validity period for testing. And I recently participated in an AU organized virtual conference which spoke to the exchange and sharing of data, and basically facilitating not just facilitating accrediting testing laboratories, but facilitating the airline operators, facilitating the civil aviation authorities, and so that and the passengers in terms of moving between different countries. But in addition to the aspect of testing, we need to then look at how we can make travel contactless. So in other ways, travelers taking themselves in and being able to be verified on arrival, and that it does not really involve much.
Can I see when I pop my eyes up? So if I pop them up, I'm just like, hey, what's
Dat is raar zo.
I'd like to end there at this point because that's my older speaking in terms of time. And I will take any other questions or any other comments that other members may make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, so much for your valuable input, and I'm so glad you could make it to our conference. We are deeply honored. One spontaneous question I would like to ask the Minister, in how far is it also a joint approach in Southern Africa with other countries to find a proper way to increase intercontinental trade and traffic again, particularly in the southern region, from here to Mozambique to South Africa? Is there a static joint approach in harmonizing screening processes?
Well, there has been meetings, and the last meeting we had, I think, was sometime in April, May. We had it was around SADC, around. So unfortunately, I wasn't I didn't manage to attend that meeting. But one of the most that was perhaps discussed and that we had not at the time reached agreement on was in relation to what sort of validity period would be accepted for your COVID test results. And what I'm most delighted about is that in terms of the 72 hours that I spoke about, that it is now a convergence around the AU member states from the meeting that I had. Listen to the position that our country has taken at the time. And other member states have been speaking for a slightly longer period of time. I think this has been possibly the principal issue. Not to suggest that other matters are not of key importance. The screening of passengers clearly to identify those that have fevers and those that would exhibit symptoms is critical and inclusive of the keeping the aircraft sanitized and but I believe that once we have reached this agreement, once we articulate a common set of requirements, this should bring in the confidence that we're talking about the traveling community, and this will also give assurance to the airline operators when they are onboarding passengers that they would not face any difficulty or consequently find that they face problems which would have an impact on their revenue when they travel on board. I hope I've gone some way towards answering the question. South Africa, I can comment, has more recently opened their skies. Namibia, likewise, and I'm very hopeful that we will be doing so shortly.
Dr. Adam, since you are coordinating a lot of activities on the continent with Africa CDC, could you imagine, to, for example, initiate an initiative, particularly for the countries strongly dependent on tourism? I'm thinking about Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, but also Kenya, Madagascar, Mauritius, and so on. All these countries are heavily dependent on tourism. Do you think there could be a joint tourism initiative, which could be a bridge also to the Union to find ways how to open up the borders and find joint standards?
Well, I think we don't have a choice because as you saw during the lockdowns on the continent, most countries, people took a bet on the economy and did not even wait on the science to reduce the restrictions on lockdown because people would rather, eat and survive and eat than to. So they took a chance basically on COVID. But governments do have a responsibility to ensure that they put in the best safety processes or mechanisms by which we can contain diseases and be able to manage them. The same mechanisms we adopted in countries apply as we start moving across countries. Just as most governments were not able to test, the mass testing was not that cost effective for people to just be testing. But at least for now, we have a clear sense of the clinical features and its management, as we did in the beginning. And so as countries have opened up, we're beginning to see the fatality rates among countries. And that, for me, is going to be also systematic of what is happening in various countries. But none of this can be done without partnerships. It's strategic partnerships. That's why we think bringing technology partners, like we have in Africa, where the likes of Econet and others are providing technology solutions, Anabas is providing technology solutions, bringing them together and sharing ideas on what best we can bring together from the private sector to empower the public sector, who have a responsibility for making policies and ensuring that these policies are harmonized across countries. So that we're looking for the best examples from countries. So if South Africa is the country that is providing the best example in terms of data analytics and whatever, well, let's take it. If Botswana is has some examples we can learn from, let's bring it all together, let's share ideas, let's share the data, and let's start by understanding that we're not going to get perfect results, but if we can get roots, so Botswana, Namibia, Rwanda, Kenya, we can get people beginning to travel, and we can begin to subject the tests that they're bringing from countries that they've done, and put in a quality assurance mechanism where we're able to know that okay, people coming from there are doing some labs that we can trust. The airlines are putting in place all the right mechanisms for safety. Then there should be a data-driven process by which we're able to guide a scientific, empirical, data-driven process by which we're able to now guide how we're able to open our borders. But this should not be only subjected to airlines. I mean, we're struggling to open our land borders now simply because of the same problem. How do we know that people who show up at land borders did not print their test certificates on their laptop? How do we show that people are showing up at hotels and having conferences and meetings, have not bypassed the regime and entered and transmitted disease from other parts of the regions or the countries into the country and are showing up there? So these are the things that we can only do if we use technology. And I think these technologies are available. And we can only continue to improve them as and when we learn lessons. But we cannot just keep our operations shut because our countries cannot just depend on love. So that's my view. Thank you.
Mr. Enders, one more question from my side. Considering that Germany at the moment has a presidency in the European Union, could you imagine or could you think about that Germany could offer basically a platform of which to the European Union to identify proper standards and screening processes which would be acceptable to the Union in order to open up this important sector of aviation and tourism between Europe and Africa?
Well, sorry. This is actually taking place right now. I'm not too familiar with it. We are, of course, dealing bilaterally with the issue, but we're also dealing with it in Brussels. But as I said, I'm not that familiar with where we stand. We have so many different initiatives. G20 was mentioned. I actually mentioned it myself. G7. I was the main negotiator on the German side for the G7 transportation discussion group. We came up with a marvelous paper, and it had absolutely no effect whatsoever, which is sad, of course. But in the EU, of course, it will have a much stronger effect because we are committing to things that we then have to implement. But unfortunately, as I said, these are other colleagues dealing with the European level, and I would have to get back to you on that. But it is definitely happening.
I mean, I think I also want to take this opportunity that we have today this very open and friendly discussion between all of us. Possibly we structure a follow-up conference in a smaller group, you know, between the African Union, African CDC, the distinguished minister from Botswana, and also Dr. Eden, who is a main driver in standardizing the testing in Africa and documenting it, to see if we have an opportunity here on the one hand side, not only to support Africa, but more importantly to support also our European carriers and tourism industry, you know, how to reopen it by integrating technology, valuable testing, and reliable testing, and that we can basically initiate a certain private public partnership in form of a working group to find solutions for opening up the industry. Could you imagine we could set up such a joint video conference in the next days or weeks?
Who are you actually asking? Are you asking me or? Well, yes, I had wanted to say, actually, I have had no opportunity to talk about Africa, which is sad because I actually grew up in Africa, and so I think that should be possible, but one should not overestimate the possibilities, because, as I said, there are so many different groups, and it is so hard to get the right people on board. And in that case, we would not just need someone from the transportation sector like myself, but we would also need to have a health expert and maybe also someone, an immigration expert, to really make things work. But let me add that when we discussed, when we negotiated the G7 paper, it was actually very important for me to direct the attention of the G7 countries to transportation sectors in other parts of the world, because at the time, back in March and April, we saw all these insolvencies of airlines such as Air Mauritius, South African, Avianca, and other airlines of the South. And it was I made a point of including these into the statement, or having these included into the statement, because we do not want to wake up after Corona and see that the only airlines that are left are actually in the northern part of of our planet. And I'm actually quite happy to see that most people traveling to Africa these days are actually going through an African hub. I hope I'm not mistaken. So it is important to focus on the industry and the services sector of the African continent. And if there's anything I can do to help them, I'm happy to participate in such an event. But once again, there are so many processes.
Right, but I think it's always important to make the first step. And, you know, at this moment, I thank you very much that you agreed, you know, to support this initiative. And let's see how we can jointly organize this, also possibly with our hub and the current discussions we have, you know, with our own carrier and other carriers in Europe, but also with hotel institutions and associations. And I think it is, I think, a must from my point of view that we must find a practical approach which is, you know, not only helping Africa, but also helping our industry, you know, to survive. Yeah. Because I think when you look at our European carriers, they're also not far away from insolvency. And then it's again the question, is it, you know, is additional taxpayers' money necessary to save them? Yeah. And I think even as a taxpayer in Europe, you know, I must have an interest to see not only how we fund the airlines, but how can we make them survive again. Same to the hotel and tourism industry. One of my best friends runs a travel office here in Düsseldorf, and he has basically nothing to do these days, just administrating cancellations. Yeah. So I think it is in our all interest to find a common platform to see how we can find practical solutions. And I think the world learned so much about this particular pandemic and virus. And I think I would to compare the situation we were facing in March and April. In the meantime, we learned a lot about the virus. We learned about, how we can efficiently test and identify people who are infected, and we know how to process this information more and more, also outside of Europe. I mean, we don't have speakers today from Asia, but they do a terrific job in terms of testing and documenting the testing and making inter-Asian travel possible again. So I think we should take this practical approach, and I think this will be something we should discuss after the meeting to see how we possibly can create such a platform, not only with Europe, with our friends in Africa, but also possibly with involvement from the States, which are also a major player in the international travel and tourism industry. Yeah. Okay. At this point, I really want to thank all of your speakers. Your input was fantastic. I think that you are beyond any expectation I had in this conference. It was great. I think from an outcome point of view, I think we all agree we have to support the aviation industry. We have to support the hotel and tourism industry. We learned from Dr. Adam the very practical approach the African Union and African CDC is taking by utilizing technology, by utilizing testing technology, which we, of course, strongly support. And we always have been a big supporter of DGNI too, African Excellent and African Union. Also, we are the first test company who is now setting up their first plants in Africa. As you all know, we are building at the moment our test plant in Ghana, where we produce and test for the continents. So that's why we are very happy about this outcome of this conference. I think we all learned a lot, and I think as a positive outcome, I think we will follow up in the next days and see if we can find a joint platform, a joint platform for discussion and communication and exchange to possibly find pragmatic ways to open up the industry again. Again, thank you everybody. Thank you also to the audience who was here today in our webinar, even on such a short notice, but it also shows how important this topic is and how keen the people are to open up the continent again and open up the industry again. Again, thank you so much to everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend, and stay safe.